And we're live. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, this is my live stream format for my fishing videos. Normally, I'll make videos on electronics, I'll actually be in the boat fishing, or I'll look at Navionics maps and break down what everything is in a concise, like 12 to 15 minute video. So if this is the first video you're checking out, I would recommend checking out those videos first. This is a longer format. It's like an hour, hour and a half, and it's for the true bass nerds out there. So if you really want to dig into the different types of lakes that you'll see around the country, look at Navionics, Google Earth, stuff like that, and break down lakes by seasons, stay for the stream and check it out. I know you'll enjoy. And if you're just getting to bass fishing, I check out some of my other videos down using the description down below and click it on my channel. So other than that, let's get straight into the stream and welcome all the guys who are already in the chat. Good to see everyone going crazy already with comments. Good to see everyone. We got Alan, we got Chad, Mike, Jeremiah, Wesley, Caleb, Justin, Arky fan, all the guys, Caleb from Edge to the Ledge, all the normal guys are in here. Got 27 people already on, so that's pretty awesome. And so one thing I want to talk about right away is Arky fan said that Lake Maumelle just had a tournament where the 5 bass winning weight was 40 pounds. And then 38 pounds for second place. That is ridiculous. I fished Lake Maumelle forever, and it was called the Dead Sea. I caught one 8-pounder out there. I had a kid catch a 7-pounder out of the back of my boat, and caught some other pretty big ones. But that's ridiculous. I guess I need to get out in Lake Maumelle, get some fishing out there. I'm sure it's getting just crushed right now after seeing all those big weights out there. But I love that lake. It's been tough for years, though. So kind of glad to see it kicking back up and putting out some good fish. So today, guys, what we're going to do on the streams, we're looking at 3 of my Patreon subscribers' lakes. And first up, we're looking at Grand Lake in Oklahoma. And there's a BFL out there this weekend, so there was 5 or 6 guys on my Patreon page who asked me to check out that lake. I'm pretty sure they're probably all fishing the BFL, so hopefully we'll be able to show them some spots out there. The conditions are kind of brutal in Oklahoma right now. I live pretty close to Grand Lake nowadays, and so been really tough. And then we're going to be looking at some lakes further in the Midwest. I've been looking at a lot of lakes in the south and in the southeast, and not as many lakes in the Midwest. And so I picked 2 lakes in the Midwest this time so I can try to appeal to everyone who's in my audience. So we have a lake in Ohio and a lake in Indiana to check out. And they're also smaller lakes. A lot of guys have been asking for smaller lakes, not these big giant reservoirs that I've been looking at over my previous streams. So I'm pretty excited to see what we're going to look at today and check out these lakes. And so again, we're going to be breaking down some pre-spawn patterns for these bass today. And so I'm going to do a quick review of what the pre-spawn means, and then I'm going to jump straight into a video. Oh, one second here. I'm seeing someone saying that it was 2-day total was 40 pounds caught on a rig over shallow grass. Okay, Kanan, thanks for clarification. The grass in Maumelle is getting really good nowadays, and I used to catch a bunch of really good fish on little crankbaits this time of year, and so maybe the grass grew back better this year. A-rigs over grass makes a lot more sense. Two days, 40 pounds, not 1 day. That would be ridiculous, catching 9-pounders out there. So glad that we got that clarification. But anyways, want to check out these lakes real quick, so I'm going to jump right into it, and I'll be responding to comments when I switch lakes, and then I'll also be doing a Q&A at the very end of the live stream. And so don't worry if I don't get to all your questions on the stream. I'll try to get through as many as I can at the end of the stream, and this video does get posted live, or does get posted onto YouTube after the live stream, so you can go back and review everything I talked about, and you can also go check out the Q&A section if you have to drop off halfway through the stream, so no worries there. So anyways, first up, I just want to switch over and start talking about the pre-spawn season as a review for those guys who are just tuning into the channel for the first time or still a little bit confused by the different seasons. So if we pull this up right here, you can see the 4 seasons of the year, as I like to define them, broken out into smaller sub-seasons that bass fishermen like to refer to. And so you have the spring, the summer, the fall, and then the winter. And in general, I like to break down the spring in the pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn. And right now, the fish are in their pre-spawn patterns in a lot of the country. Some fish are in their late winter patterns, which is at the end of the winter, and then some fish are already spawning, like down in Florida. And so probably I'd say half the country is probably in that pre-spawn pattern, and then another quarter is in the late winter and another quarter is in the spawn. So I'm going to try to focus on that mid-range, that pre-spawn pattern, probably early pre-spawn for a lot of guys, but then also into the normal pre-spawn. And so those are the cycles that I like to look at. And then I also want to give you a better idea of what I mean when I'm talking the late winter, the pre-spawn, the spawn. So if we take a look at this graphic here, you can see that I consider the late winter anytime the water temperatures are below 50 degrees. And that's around the area where I fish in Arkansas and around the south. A lot of times though, on some of the very southern lakes or out in California, the water never gets below 50 degrees. And so I know a lot of you guys are like, man, I wish the water temperatures could, or you could relate your water temperatures to my lakes. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience in Florida or over in California, so I can't really relate them as well. But just where I fish, late winter is water temps below 50 degrees, and then pre-spawn is water temperatures between 50 and 60 degrees, and then the spawn is 60 to 70 degree range. So those are the kind of general guidelines that you can use if you're fishing in the Midwest, in the South, or maybe even like on the East Coast. These rules will pretty much apply for most lakes, at least based on what I've seen on Bassmaster and what I've seen from my own experience. So with all that said, I want to start jumping right over to a lake that one of my Patreon subscribers, or multiple Patreon subscribers, suggested on my Patreon page. And for those of you who don't know what Patreon is, it is a site where you can actually support the channel by giving a monthly donation, which helps me grow the channel and produce more content. And if you like the content, it's a great way to support me and help me continue to produce more content. And you also have the option to submit some lakes for this live stream, and you get to vote on video ideas that I have for upcoming videos. And I'm going to be doing that a lot more over the next couple weeks because I want to make sure I'm getting the right content for you guys. But I'll talk about that a little bit later in the stream. And if you do want to check out my Patreon page, it's over there in the bottom right corner, right over there. Check out my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/fishthemoment. So without further ado, let's jump into our first lake of the day, which is Grand Lake in Oklahoma. So Grand Lake in Oklahoma, this is a really popular fishery for the Bassmasters and the FLW Tour. It's a really popular tournament lake. There's been a couple Bassmaster Classics out there, several FLW Tour events, and some Bassmaster Elite Series events all on this lake. And this weekend there's actually a BFL tournament out there. And the conditions are pretty brutal right now on Grand. I live about an hour and a half from Grand Lake, hour and a half, and I haven't been able to get out there just because of all the freezing temperatures and all the rain that we've had. And basically with all that rain, it's really muddied up the main lake on Grand Lake. So the whole chain is basically like a river system. And so all of the main river is just completely chocolate milk, even down by the dam where it's normally 2 to 3 to 4 feet of visibility. And on top of that, the water temperatures are really cold because we've had cold rains. So the water temperatures are between 38 and 39 degrees as of last weekend. So super cold temperatures, super cold water temperatures, air temperatures, and you have muddy water, which is not a good combination for catching bass. And so normally when I'd be fishing in the pre-spawn or the late winter time, I would be focused on fishing near some of these pockets, maybe on the mid-lake where the water's kind of clear, but maybe not super clear, throwing jerk baits, fishing jigs. And if you've watched the Bassmaster Classics from 2017 and 2014, I think, or 2015, there was 2 Bassmaster Classics out here on Grand Lake, and those were the years that they were catching them really well, up shallow on spinner baits, you're catching them on jerk baits, stuff like that, and jigs. But this time of year, the water temperatures are way colder than they were normally this time of year. So instead of being in the high 40s, maybe low 50s, like they normally are at the end of February, they're now in the high 30s, low 40s, which is super cold. And so you almost have shifted the pattern back to that late winter pattern, and the fish are probably not even close to being in the pre-spawn mode. The other challenge, though, is that the main lake, where you would normally look for fish in the late winter, is chocolate milk. And so what I mean by that is it's really dirty water, maybe only 1 foot to 2 foot of visibility at the clearest, which is really bad for Grand Lake, even on the mid-lake section where it's normally a little bit stained. And so combination of really dirty water plus really cold water temperatures is going to make it really tough to catch fish. But there are ways you can kind of combat this and hopefully put some good fish in the boat if you're going to be fishing out there this weekend on Grand. And I kind of want to talk about how I would approach it, what techniques I think could be good players, and what areas to check out. So first up, what I would be looking for is trying to stay off of the main lake where you have a lot of strong current and a lot of dirty water. And that's because in the wintertime when it's cold, that dirty water is going to cool down really quickly if you get cold days. And it'll warm up the quickest as well. But if we look at the forecast over the next few days, it's going to be like 30 degrees and raining, potentially even like snowing a tiny bit. And so you're just going to have more cold rain funneling in. That water's not going to warm up. And so instead of looking for that main lake bite where the water is really muddy and dirty, I'm going to be looking for the clearest water I can find. And whenever you have a big rain on a river system like a Grand Lake or it's a river system lake, this is part of the Neosho River, I'm going to try to stay off of the main lake. I'm also going to try to stay out of the backs of any of the major creeks because the backs of the creeks are going to get a lot of runoff from rain and they're going to be really dirty. So basically what that leaves you is you can't fish the main lake because it's too dirty and all the water is rushing through this river system as they pull the lake up and down. And you can't fish the backs of the creeks because those are also dirty. So the only place that's left to actually look for any fish is the center of the major creeks, normally near the lower end, but also sometimes near the upper end of these of the lake. And so when I'm talking major creeks, I'm talking about the biggest, longest creeks you can find. And so if you look at like maybe a creek like this is a pretty clear pocket. You can see the water is pretty dark in this pocket, so this is normally going to be a clear water pocket. But because, again, all of that rain, this whole pocket is going to get a lot of runoff water, which is going to be muddier, and it's also going to be cold runoff water, and it's probably going to stain up the majority of the back half of this pocket. Plus, the main lake is also going to be really dirty and cold, and that's going to mess up the front half of this pocket. So basically, this whole pocket is going to get washed out. But if we go over to this creek over here, for example, Duck Creek, you'll see that maybe you'll get some dirty water that comes in from the back of the creek here and washes out to about this area. And then you're going to have some dirty water from the main lake that washes out about this area. But that leaves a good section of this creek that might still have some clear water in it, especially if you're away from, if you have some of these bigger creeks that kind of will collect some of that, dirty water. These will collect water out to here that's muddy and out to here. But then right in here, near the main part of this creek, halfway between the backs of the creeks and the main lake, this is going to be your clearest water you can find. And this is going to be where I would start looking for fish. So what type of things am I looking to fish then on these parts of the lake? Well, one, the water is still probably going to be somewhat dirty because there's been so much rain. So it's not like you're going to have 4 foot of visibility, but you might have 2 feet or 1.5 to 2 feet of visibility, which is plenty of visibility to catch fish even in 40-degree water. And the thing I would be looking for specifically is any places where I can find a steeper point that has a creek channel kind of swinging by it, but it's in the mouth of a spawning pocket. Because in the pre-spawn and even in the late winter, these bass want to still get somewhere close to some spawning areas. They don't want to be too far out in the middle here hanging out because they know any second that weather can turn around, you can get a warm front or whatever, and those fish are going to start moving back up into these pockets to spawn. And so what I would be looking for if we switch over to a Navionics map, which I'll switch to real quick. Switch over to a Navionics map. Here's Grand Lake. Here's the creek I was just in, Duck Creek. We were saying that we're looking for places in the mid half of this creek. If we come in here, I'm going to be looking for places where the creek channel swings up right against the bank, like this area right here. You can see this creek channel winds in and it hugs up tight against this little bank here, and it makes a really steep drop off this point. This is the type of area where you might be able to go catch them on an Alabama rig, or maybe a suspending jerkbait, maybe like a pearl suspending jerkbait, something that's really bright because that water is going to be a little bit dingy still. And you might be able to catch them even fishing a jig down some of these deeper docks. Another spot that looks really good is even just some of these steeper walls down this bank that these fish might even, potentially move up to spawn on. Sometimes these fish will spawn on these bluffier walls, or they might just be sitting here from the winter and then waiting to transition down into this pocket. So this wall right here, where that creek channel swings in, could be another great place to fish a jerkbait, an Alabama rig, or a football jig down this bank. Another place I would kind of look for is maybe if the water isn't super dirty back in these creeks, I might be looking for places like this bank right here where you see the contour lines get really spread out by this point. There's a nice point here that these fish might sit on in the winter and the summertime. But then these contour lines get closer together and you get a steep little bank right here that feeds into this pocket. And there's also a steep bank right here You can see those contour lines are really close together, and when the contour lines are closer together, that means you have a steeper drop where it goes from shallow water to deep water really quickly. And so these are the types of areas those fish want to get on, because when you get a cold front or a cold rain, they can pull off into the deeper water out here really quickly. They're only a few, maybe a couple yards from the deep water, and then right when it starts to warm up, or you get some sun or any sort of better conditions, they can pull right up to the bank and they can start feeding again. And sometimes those fish will even feed if you get some wind. Even if it's really cold and rainy and cloudy and mucky, those fish can still pull up and feed sometimes out on these shallow banks. And maybe checking out some of these other areas in here. Again, a nice little steep bank right here that looks really good. It's kind of in between a little spawning pocket here and a spawning pocket here. This could be a great bank to catch some fish. And then, another little steep point right here, a steep transition bank right here looks really good. And on Grand Lake, one thing I can say is that normally these fish never get deeper than about 10 to 12 feet of water. Even in the middle of the summer, they might get out to 15 or 20 feet on the really clear. When it's really clear on the lower end, you get 3 or 4 feet of visibility. But if the water clarity is like a foot to a foot and a half, maybe 2 feet of water, these fish are going to be sitting shallow, less than 10 feet of water. And they're normally going to be sitting within a cast length of the bank, maybe a cast and a half of the bank year round. And that counts for even like places offshore. There's a couple times when they might get further off the bank. They might get, a couple, maybe 30, 40 yards off the bank in the summertime. But from my experience fishing on Grand and from what I've heard, these fish, especially in the spring, like to stay up real shallow. And so what you can do is fish some of these little pockets and stuff with, again, jerk baits, Alabama rigs, stuff like that the fish need to be able to see a little bit. You need to have a little bit of water visibility to get those fish to bite. So that's kind of the first thing I would do. I would, check all these pockets back, or all these creeks, and look for the midsection of all these creeks, and look for some places, especially like right in here. This area of the lake can be a lot cleaner because, again, it's pretty far away from a actual runoff from this major creek, and it's pretty far away from the main river. So this part of the lake could be really solid for a place to check out to look for fish. And again, you're looking for the exact same stuff, those steeper banks, those steeper points. We move up in here, you can see there's some steeper little points up right here where those fish can pull up on. Even some stuff like right up in here. It's a little bit further off the bank and offshore, but you might be able to find some fish. They're staging up on some of these shallower, steeper points back up, like stuff like this. Fishing, again, Alabama rigs, jerk baits, stuff like that. And then the other pattern that you can always try on the lakes when it's really cold, water temperatures are 40 degrees, 38, 39 degrees, and you have really dirty water, is to actually embrace the dirty water and wait for days when you get sunlight. And unfortunately for the guys who are fishing this weekend on the BFL on Grand, there's not going to be any sun, and so that's going to really hurt that bite. And so again, I would focus on these midsections of these creeks, fishing a jerkbait, fishing an Alabama rig or a jig. But when you do get days when it starts to, the sun comes up and it starts to warm up that dirty water, what happens in that dirty water is it warms up a lot quicker than the clear water. And so when you have a really sunny day in the winter, that water temperature can go from 39 up to 42 or 43 degrees really fast, and those fish can really move up to feed. And so what I like to do is actually look for rock. And I look for rock regardless of water clarity. It could be 6 inches of visibility. It can be literal chocolate milk. But what I'm looking for is really good rocky banks that are in the backs or in the mouths of these pockets that have good chunk rock, that have a little bit, thicker rock on them, like a bank like this right here, where you can see you have some really nice chunk rock. And it doesn't really matter what type of, sometimes it's better to have a creek channel swing against it. It's always good to have some deep water by it, but, it doesn't really matter too much this time of year. As long as you find that big chunk rock or that chunkier rock, like you see on some of these banks right here. And what I do is fish a flat-sided crankbait down these banks as slow as I possibly can. Again, water temperatures are 38, 39, 40 degrees. You have really stained water, and you have the sunlight, which is heating up these rocks and pushing these fish up shallower. All of those are a combination for getting a really good flat-sided crankbait bite. And when I'm talking about a flat-sided crankbait, what I'm really talking about, let me switch over here, switch over to Tackle Warehouse to give you an idea. The one that I like is the KVD 1.5 flat. You guys have seen me throw this 1,000 times on my channel if you've watched my channel for any time at all. I haven't fished it as much lately, but I've definitely been fishing it over the past. And my favorite color personally is a chartreuse powder blue back. And I'm throwing this crankbait. It's a flat side crankbait. It's completely flat on its sides. And these fish just love it in the cold weather. And this thing dives 7 to 8 feet deep on 10-pound fluorocarbon. And I'll throw this on 10-pound fluorocarbon line. I'll cast that bait out there, let it get out as far as I can. And I'm going to crank it down 3 or 4 or 5 retrieves until it hits some of those rocks. Then I'm going to just barely turn my handle and keep that bait bumping those rocks, bumping the rocks, and just fish it as slow as possible. And you may only get 3 to 4 to 5 bites a day. Maybe you can get 6 or 7 bites if the fish are really biting. But this is a technique where you can catch some big fish, especially when that sun's out, when you get that dirty, cold water. And it's not a bite where you're going to catch a ton of bass, but the ones you do catch are going to be really good. And I do see a couple guys saying, when you, let's see here, 1 second here. Would you want to spend some time graphing on some of these dirty water lakes? That's kind of the gist of the question there. Would you spend a lot of time graphing on these lakes? And I would say no. I wouldn't spend a ton of time actually going around graphing on places like Grand Lake where you have really dirty water this time of year. Those fish sometimes will get in those positions where they might be a little bit offshore. But on a Grand Lake, you have dirty water. These fish like to be shallow all the time. Then you definitely want to just focus on that shallower water, focus on that 10-foot or less, cast away from the bank. That's where you're going to have your most consistent bite. You might be able to find a few places, like sneaky places if you graph for a long time, but that's a pretty tough deal this time of year. It's different when you get to a clear water lake or you get to some places where there's a bigger reservoirs where you have spotted bass, stuff like that. But for a Grand Lake, I would just focus on fishing down the bank, staying a cast away from the bank, finding the bigger chunk rocks, those steeper drop off, stuff like that. That's where you're going to get them. So that's it for my analysis of Grand Lake, what I'd be doing. Hopefully that will help some of the guys on my Patreon page who are fishing out there for the BFL. So I'm going to just run through some of these comments to make sure I'm not missing anything huge. Let's see here. A lot of guys just asking what lakes we're doing. Appreciate all the guys in the comments just going back and forth, asking questions, and then having other people answer the questions for me. I always appreciate that. It's amazing. Jason Walls, thank you so much for the $20 super chat. Hey, Johnny, thanks for everything you do for us. You're crushing it. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for the continued support. As always, 265 guys on the stream. That's amazing, guys. I love when I can get people on the stream interacting in the chat. So as much as you can, release a message in the chat, talk to people, helps everyone become a better fisherman. And my goal is to try to get 300 people on one of my streams. I've hit really close. I've got like to 270 people, never hit 300. So be sharing out the streams with friends, sharing out the videos. It'll really help grow the channel. And it really helps me put out more content for sure. So what I want to do now is jump straight over to the next lake, which is going to be Rocky Fork Lake in Ohio. So we're going to take a little trip over there. Okay, Rocky Fork Lake. This is a lake that was suggested on my Patreon page by Clayton Hask. He has a youth tournament that he's being the bowyer for, and so he has some high school kids he's taken out on this lake for a tournament. So definitely glad to be able to help him out and help some high school kids fish. I fished high school fishing for all 4 years of high school and did the junior program since I was like 9 years old. So love to get back to some of the youth anglers. And so this lake is a small little lake in Ohio. It actually has some pretty good diversity. If you look at it, it has some cleaner water down here indicated by the darker water, and it has some dirty water on the top of the lake. So it has some mixtures of water clarity. And if we look at some of the temperatures, let me switch over to the weather here real quick for the area. You can see we're in Hillsboro, Ohio. It's a town pretty close to this lake. If you look at the weather is 47 degrees tomorrow, 43, 45, 55, 49. So warming up. It's not super warm, but it's warming up for sure. I'm sure the ice is starting to melt off the lakes, and the water temperature still, again, might be really cold. 30, high 30s, low 40s, maybe creeping up into the mid 40s. I'm not really sure. I haven't had a chance to actually know exactly what the conditions are out on this lake, but from what I'm seeing, it's probably similar to what we faced on Grand. Probably going to be some high water because of all the rain we've had all over the country. Could be some cold water as well. So I'm going to switch over to Google Earth here and kind of give you a lay of the lake a little bit. So Mentioned earlier, we have some really nice clean water near the lower end. It looks like it's a pretty decent sized lake. It has some little boat docks. We have some pockets, some points, some potential offshore places kind of out here. A lot of boat docks, which looks really good. And as you move further up the lake, not seeing a ton of rock. We have some like swimming areas. We have maybe a little wall right here, like a retaining wall, which looks pretty good. That could be really good as the fish start to spawn. And then as you move further up the lake, it gets a lot shallower. Seeing another retaining wall down on this end of the lake. And then as you move up, there's a lot more shallow laydowns, shallow brush, and places where you can flip and maybe throw spinner bait, stuff like that as the water starts to warm. So really good looking lake. Challenge though is that it's going to be so cold and the lake's pretty small, so these fish are going to be potentially kind of shell shocked, and it's going to be tough to get those fish to bite. So if we go to Navionics here real quick, let me switch over here. Transition this over, and then we'll pick up Rocky Fork Lake. We can see that you can see on here on this lake that it's pretty deep. You have 35 feet of water out here, slightly stained water. You have some nice island out here these fish kind of stage on. You have some steeper banks in here, which look really good. You have almost 20 feet of water right off the bank, and it's leading in some of these spawning pockets. You have a couple steeper points that I really like in here. You also have a really steep bank just in general going down here that's a lot steeper, where a creek channel swings into this. This looks like a great place. You might be able to catch them on a jerk bait, or maybe an Alabama rig, or even fishing a jig, something like that off this bank. And then as we move further down the lake, you can see again some really nice steep points that these fish might stage on as the water warms up. And then another kind of steeper bank in here. So there's some good drop off, some good deeper water, some longer points, stuff like that these fish can definitely get on. So first thing I want to talk about is some of the shallow water, and then I'll also talk about some offshore places that you might be able to catch some fish out here, especially if they're smallmouth. I actually don't know if there's smallmouth in this lake. Let me know if there's any smallmouth in here. If it's just a largemouth lake, then that's no problem, but I know that there can potentially be smallmouth. Let's see here. I'm not getting any comments on that real quick. I'll give it just a second. But basically, what I'm looking for, again, in the late winter, which is probably where Ohio is right now. So late winter, water temperatures are in the low 40s. It's really cold. It's snowing. It's raining every other day. What I would try to do is stay out of the creeks in here. There's not probably going to be as much water like on Grand Lake that's getting funneled through this lake. It's not like a river system or anything. And so the water is going to be potentially muddy back in these creeks where you have a lot of runoff and rain, but it won't be super muddy out on the main body of the water. And also probably going to stay away from the upper end of the lake. Again, with all the rain, the lake could actually be flooded a little bit, could be a little bit high, so I'm going to stay away from this part of the lake, and I'm going to focus more on the midsection to the lower section of the lake, because you'll find a little bit clearer water, which is a little more stable in the winter time, and especially like into the early pre-spawn. And so two things I'm going to talk about as far as fishing up here. First, I'm going to assume the lake isn't flooded. Then I'm also going to assume the lake is potentially flooded. I don't know if it is, but hopefully if your lake is flooded, you can kind of take away some of the tips I'm going to talk about. By the way, JP78, Johnny 5 Alive, great breakdown. Enjoy the content. Thank you for the $3 super chat. Really appreciate that. Saying that it's largemouth bass, largemouth dominate. There's probably some smallies, but mostly largemouth. Really good to know. Tournament is until late April. That's what Tristan is saying. So it's a late April tournament. So we can kind of talk about that potentially a little bit as well. But we can. I'm seeing some comments in here. I'm trying to just make sure I'm catching everything. Do a little at fish the moment if you have something on the lake that you want me to know. But the youth tournament is in late April. So we'll talk about the pre-spawn, then we'll kind of talk about how the fish will transition from pre-spawn into late April. That'll be a good deal to kind of talk about the migration as well. So basically what I'd be looking for this time of year is these really steep banks that are leading into these creeks. What these fish will do is they'll probably sit out here, somewhere out here by this creek channel, especially when the lake is iced over, if it ices over. They'll want to sit, near this creek channel, near that deeper water, so they can get away from the ice. And, sometimes you can catch them, closer to the bank even when the ice is on the water, but the bigger bass are going to stay near these creek channels. And then once the ice starts to thaw, the bass up north are pretty quick to actually move up shallow, even when it's really cold outside. And so they'll move right away up to some of these banks and start getting on some of these steeper banks. You can catch them on jerk baits really well if the water has more than 1.5 feet of visibility. Maybe catch them on Alabama rig if you're allowed to throw like 3 hooks or 5 hooks on the Alabama rig, or fishing maybe even like a lipless crankbait down these banks. Fish a red lipless crankbait, fishing it, kind of yo-yoing it up and down those banks with like a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce lipless crankbait. And a couple other places that look really good. Again, you have like a nice main lake point right here that has some steep water off of it. There's actually a nice little hump out here that looks great that these fish could potentially be sitting on. We'll get into that in a second. And then you can see, again, another steep kind of transition bank here that this looks like more of like a pre-spawn place when it gets to be in the mid 40 to 50 degree water temperature range. And this is actually a place where that retaining wall was. So if we switch over to the Google Earth image, retaining walls are fantastic places for bass to spawn. Gives them some hard cover. There's only some rocks down there, and you get some docks that can spawn in and around. And right in here, this is a little bit steeper stretch or a deeper stretch of this retaining wall, and it starts to flatten out. And so these bass are going to love to spawn and stage right here on this deeper stretch. And then as it starts to warm up, water temperatures get in the mid 50s, high 50s into the 60s, they'll start pushing back in these creeks and start spawning back on some of these retaining walls. And honestly, if I was fishing a tournament in late April, this is one of the first places I would check out is this retaining wall right here. I'd pitch it with a wacky ray worm, flip it with a beaver style bait, stuff like that. And then I would also check out this retaining wall right down here because it has a lot of really good cover, and it's also unique. It's different from what the rest of the lake offers. A lot of this lake looks like it offers a lot of, timber and laydowns. And a lot of times if you have a lake that has a ton of laydowns, a ton of buckbrush, stuff like that, it can be overwhelming because there's so much of it to fish. And so sometimes I like to kind of avoid some of the more obvious places like that and focus on the, like retaining walls or places that are irregular because it's a little bit easier to pattern. And then another place that I really would check out if I was fishing out here, let me switch it back over to Navionics real quick, is I would check out some of the offshore stuff. And this is not as prevalent, especially if you're fishing late April in your tournament, but this offshore stuff is going to be really potentially good, especially if there's some rock or some grass in this lake. I don't think there's any grass, doesn't look like there is. If there's any kind of rock piles or offshore cover off these humps, this hump can be really good because it's right out in the middle of the lake in the mouth of a big creek that's close to some of these spawning areas where I said those fish might pre-spawn. And what these fish will do is they'll sit out here off these humps right before they start moving up to the banks when that water temperature is 40, 45 degrees. You can catch them on a Carolina rig or a football jig right off of these deeper humps, 12 to 13 feet of water. Looks pretty good. Another place you could check out is you have a nice point that has a creek channel winding right up against it. This could be another great place those fish are going to be wintering on, and you might be able to catch them right as that ice starts to thaw. Catch them out here off these points. Again, Carolina rigs, fishing maybe a lipless crankbait down there. This is only 7-8 foot on top. You can cast that lipless crankbait out to the bottom, rip it off the bottom and yo-yo it, or even a blade bait could work really well. Same thing with this point right here. And then last place I wanted to show you on some of the deep stuff is right out here. There's 1,000 marks out off this point, but you can see a creek channel swings in right off the tip of this island. There's also a couple other places like right in here we have a flat spot off this island. Looks really good. And then there's also a little there's like a nice drop off this point. Pretty much this whole island offers a lot of good cover. And if you can find any rocks that are out there, like a rock pile or brush, anything like that, anywhere around this island is going to be great because those fish are going to move up to spawn and they're going to move right up into this island. They're going to spawn up there and then they're going to pull off out here and sit here all summer chasing shad, stuff like that, perch, things like that out here in the middle of the lake. First up, Chad Turner, thank you so much for a $20 super chat. I've learned so much from your channel. Always great content. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chad. Really appreciate it. I'm glad you're enjoying the content. It's 256 people on that is awesome. And just I'm so happy for all the support that you guys are giving me and that you're enjoying the videos. And it's actually a good segue real quick before we start talking a little bit more about some spawning areas that the high school guys can check out on this lake, is that I'm going to be starting to post a lot more polls on my Patreon page for content that you guys want me to make. And the reason I'm doing that is because I found some of my videos do super well, some of them don't do as well with you guys, and I have a ton of ideas in my head, and so I'm not lacking for ideas, but I want to make sure I'm making videos that resonate with what you guys want and actually help you guys become better fishermen. So on my Patreon page, which is the link is over there on the bottom right corner of the screen, you can subscribe there. $5 a month is the just a base donation where you can get your lake submitted for the live streams. Plus, you can start voting on some of these video ideas I'm gonna be doing. It's a great way to support the channel if you like the content, and it really just helps me continue to grow the channel and pursue what I'm doing full time, or doing what I want to do potentially in the future. And then the other thing that I want to talk about is that I'm also going to be posting some stuff on YouTube community pages. So my community page on YouTube will have a like option to post a poll, and so some of the top ideas that come out of my Patreon page will also get posted occasionally to YouTube community page, so that you guys can vote on the video ideas here if you don't have the means to actually support on the Patreon page. But I'm definitely be doing a lot more on Patreon, maybe just a few on YouTube, so you'll definitely be involved either way. But if you want to have a direct voice in the content I'm making, definitely check out Patreon. So people are dropping like flies ever since I started talking about Patreon. So let's jump straight back into the videos, or into the lake breakdown. So next up, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about where these fish potentially can spawn, especially for these guys who are going to be fishing that high school tournament in late April. And so what I would be looking for specifically on this lake is anywhere where you have a really steep bank and then it moves into a flatter bank, especially on these smaller reservoirs. Places where these fish like to spawn and where like to pre-spawn is really close to places where you have a really steep bank and then it leads into a spawning flat. So here's a really good example. You have a nice steep bank right here, and then it starts to lead into some of these pockets. And what these fish can do is they can stage on this steeper point. Again, those contour lines are really close together, and then they can move back in here into this creek to spawn, and you can catch some really good fish up in these short, shallow pockets up spawning. And then as the fish move back out, they're going to move right back out to some of these points and kind of stage here before moving back out to the main lake in the summertime. And so you can catch the fish coming in here, you can catch them as they're back in the pockets and catch them coming out. And you might be thinking, okay, why not just fish down this bank right here or just come and roll into this pocket? Well, if you look, this pocket doesn't actually have as much of a steep drop anywhere near it. There's not a steep bank in this entire area. Instead, you might have a steep bank over here where this bank actually gets a little bit steeper right in here. If we zoom out, you can see those contour lines get a little bit darker. And so places I would check out where these fish might spawn is just these two little short pockets on the edges of where this deeper little stretch is. And again, those fish will pre-spawn here. They'll then pull to either side to spawn and spawn in these couple little pockets, and they'll move right back out to the steeper bank in the post-spawn. And so I would probably be skipping up this pocket right here. I probably wouldn't even check it out, just because I know that you could catch fish in there, but the bigger quality fish are going to be, or the better quality fish are going to be closer to these steeper banks. And just give you a few more examples of that. If we look in here, here's a nice little spot here where you have a nice steep bank leading into a pocket. These fish can definitely spawn back up in here, and they'll chill on this steeper bank in the pre-spawn, post-spawn. Same thing right here. You have a nice steep bank, and it kind of leads into this pocket. This whole pocket right here actually looks really good. It says a deep stretch here, a deep stretch here on both sides, and it is a great place to look for some spawning bass once they start to move up the spawn. So those are the most consistent places I found on these small little lakes where you don't have a ton of water to cover and everything kind of looks the same. And so if we switch back over to Google Earth, you can kind of see if we go down these banks, everything looks really similar. It's all just, a bank with maybe some wood, maybe some laydowns, and places where these fish can spawn, there's actually some nice little rocky outcrops, and these could be great places where those fish can actually pre-spawn. I like these type of rocky areas. You can fish crankbaits and stuff on them when it's windy and catch some good fish. But there's all kinds of, places, and it all looks pretty much the same. So instead of trying to focus on what cover you have on the bank and what types of, like cover you out there, whether it's grass or boat docks or laydowns, don't worry about that. Just focus on the contour lines instead, because everything looks the same, and you're going to be a lot more successful. And you're also going to probably find the pockets and stuff that a lot of guys are overlooking, because it's really obvious to just run up and say, oh, I'm going to fish this little creek right here. Now I'm going to run up here and I'm going to fish this little creek. Then I'm going to fish in the back of this creek, because I'm always told fish like to spawn in the back of the creeks, and that's what all the Elite Series guys say. But instead, if we go back over to the Navionics, you say to yourself, okay, what are the places where they're going to be in the pre-spawn and where they're going to be in the post-spawn, and try to kind of triangulate that. You might be able to find some really sneaky areas, like right here, where you have a nice steep point where you have a nice creek channel that swings in, and you might be able to say, okay, this bank is steeper, that creek channel swings right in here, also swings down this side. This bank could be really good because it has deep water on both sides of it and a little bit steeper shore, so this little bank can be good. And it might be just completely overlooked by most anglers because they're going to run straight to this creek and start fishing down in the back of this creek, trying to fish in here. And again, they'll catch fish, but a lot of times you'll catch a lot smaller fish. You can obviously catch good ones in there as well, but these sneakier little banks are the places to get untouched by a lot of anglers, and because they're not having as many people pressuring them, they can normally produce a lot bigger fish. So that's pretty much it for Rocky Fork Lake. I'm going to switch now over to my last lake, which is Monroe Lake in Indiana. Okay, let me pull up Monroe Lake. So moving away from Ohio, moving over to Indiana, staying in the Midwest, and we're looking at a really awesome lake right here. Got some really nice images here of the lake from above, and before we get into that, I do want to jump over and talk about some of the conditions that this lake is facing at the moment. So here we go, Weather Channel. We got Bloomington, Indiana, which is pretty close to the Monroe Lake that we're looking at. And as you can see, again, similar temperatures what we kind of had going on in Ohio. Some freezing rain today, getting up into the 40s later in the week, and consistently staying in the 40s, maybe dropping into the 30s next week. So that could definitely cool down things and hurt the fishing a little bit, but we have a little bit of a warming trend right now, which hopefully would thaw out the lakes and get those fish really active. And in Ohio and up in Michigan, places like that, especially lakes where the lake freezes and it thaws off, you'll be amazed how shallow those fish get right after the lake thaws. Those fish are going to get right up on the bank again. They're going to want to get up and spawn, and they don't want to mess around. They're waiting for the water temperatures to warm up just enough for them to spawn, and so even if it's 40, 45 degree water temperatures, those fish can get really shallow up on some of those northern lakes. So don't be afraid to fish shallow right when the ice thaws. I remember fishing a tournament actually when I was in, or it was when I was fishing as a co-angler in some of the Wisconsin tournaments. I would fish as a co-angler with one of the series when I was like 12 years old, and a guy ran me way up this river. The ice had just thawed off this river system, and we went up in this slough 2-hour drive. It was the coldest run of my life, and we pulled it back in this pocket. It was like 52 degree water temperature, I remember, and we were catching fish on buzzbaits in 52 degree water in like 2 feet of water. These fish were in like old lily pad stems and old grass that was still kind of alive. We were chunking buzzbaits, and I thought this dude was crazy until he caught like a 3.5 pounder and a 3 pounder on a buzzbait. Super cold water, super shallow, and the ice had just thawed, but crazy stuff happens up north for sure. And then anyways, when we're looking over here on Monroe Lake, one thing we can look at is to see that the bottom of the lake is pretty clear. You have that darker water down here, which is normally an indication of clear water. Then you have the dirtier water on this side of the lake, which again, you can tell because the water has a more brown or green hue to it. So that's going to be maybe 1 foot to 2 feet of visibility on the upper end, maybe even less than that, 6 inches. Then you might have 2 to 7 feet of visibility here on the lower end. So you definitely have cleaner water down here. And I'm not sure if there's smallmouth in this lake. Looks like it could potentially be a smallmouth lake. I'm not really sure. It does look very similar to Grand Lake, which we kind of looked at earlier. It kind of has that same feel to it, at least. And so again, pre-spawn bass fishing, places you want to look for are the steeper banks, the clearer water. You heard me at the beginning talk about, if you haven't had a chance to hear my spiel on pre-spawn bass fishing, this video will get posted to YouTube right after the stream. You can go back and rewatch the beginning of this live stream to catch up on all of the different pre-spawn patterns I talked about for Grand Lake. A lot of them will apply on this lake as well. And so I'm not going to get into everything again and kind of repeat what I talked about earlier, but I do want to show you some other unique things about Monroe Lake that might hold some extra fish. And so before we get into that, I do want to switch over to Navionics really quick and kind of show you what we're seeing there. So here's Monroe Lake, and first thing you'll kind of notice is that it has some contour lines, but the contour lines are not great. And there's a lot of lakes around the country that kind of have these like not so great contour lines. And what you can actually do on this Navionics web app, and this is Navionics web app is right here. There's a link right, it says follow along on Navionics web app. So I left the URL right there, so you can just type that in and follow along. And you can look up all of your lakes for free. And if you actually go down here into this corner, you'll see a little sonar beam, and you can click Navionics, which gives you your standard base map. And you can see right here, the lake map isn't great. It's pretty terrible, to be honest. Basically has the main creek channel and like contour lines every, 8 to 9 feet. So not a great contour line map. But then if you click over here on this little icon down here, which is the Navionics icon, you can pull up sonar chart. And this is actually charts that people have made by graphing around, and then they've saved their navigation data to their computer, to their app, and then they've uploaded it so that other people can actually see what the lake looks like. And so this is some user submitted data, and you get a better view of what this lake actually looks like from a contour perspective. And you still, you have some pretty decent contour lines on this lower end, but then you get to some areas where the contour lines are not so great, and so it's not foolproof by any means, but it gives you at least a general idea. And so again, places that I'm definitely going to be looking at if I came out here to Monroe Lake. On the lower end, I'd be looking at some of these places where this creek channel swings in right against some of these banks, creating a really steep bank. It's a great place to fish a jerkbait, fish a jig, maybe fish a Ned rig down those banks, especially up north. That Ned rig can be really, really good fishing down these steeper banks, especially in the 40-degree weather. What I do is keep my boat out in 30 to 40 feet of water, maybe even 45 if you can find it. And then I'd fire that Ned rig as far up to the bank as I can and try to fish it down there in the 12 to 25 foot of water, fishing it really slow. It's a really good way to catch fish, especially near the main lake and in the mouths of some of these shorter pockets where you have that creek channel swinging up against the bank. Great way to catch fish up there. And, I would be looking at any place, basically, any of these pockets where you have a creek channel swinging right across the mouth of it. These are going to be your high percentage places in the late winter and in the early pre-spawn. And so this point right here looks just dynamite. You might be able to catch some fish even fishing a Carolina rig off this point or a football jig. You have that creek channel swinging right against it. Those fish will sit out there all winter, even when the lake is frozen. And then right when it starts to thaw, they'll move back up onto these points and feed up, especially if you get some sunny days, some warmer days, some windy days, and you can crush them off this type of point. Even catching them back in some of these little pockets back in here, great place to catch some fish that are staging up, getting ready to move back into the pockets, and you can catch them on some of these steeper banks. And all stuff we talked about in Grand Lake, and again, you can check that video out, or that part of the video out, as I post this video back onto my channel if you missed it. And it'll be live on my channel like 5 minutes after this live stream's over, so no worries. And then again, another great little transition bank where the creek channel swings right in, and then it feeds this little pocket. Another great jerkbait spot, Ned rig spot. So those are some places that these fish will definitely get, and you can kind of replicate that around the lake. But what I really want to get into is some really cool stuff way up the lake, up in the river on this lake. And especially if you get some warmer temperatures and those waters start to warm up really quickly, there's actually some really good ditches and drains way up this river. And they're great places to find bass on these like shallower, dirtier water lakes, and it's one of the areas that you can get some really big fish and a lot of people don't check out. So I kind of want to show you, it's kind of a sneaky little deal that not a lot of guys talk about. So transitioning back over here in Monroe, if we look here, basically what we have on Monroe is we have, this map here, which is from, I actually don't know when this is taken. This is from 2015. But again, for those of you who watched my Google Earth video where I did all my Google Earth tips, you can actually go up to the top of the screen here to your menu bar. You can say Show Historical Imagery. Click in that. You can then scroll this back to use old historical imagery of this lake. And so you can actually see this lake when the images were taken on Google Earth over the years. So this image was taken on December 2011, 2010 in December 2009. You can see all these old historical images. And if we zoom in, you can see that the lake actually looks different as we move back. And so you can see there's actually some nice lily pads and stuff back up in here, some grass and some really great looking flooded cover way back up this river. And if we keep taking this back, over time, you can see that you can actually get an image when the lake was really low. And this is like the gold mine. If you're ever looking at your lake on Google Earth and you can find an image when the lake is low, that's just dynamite. And so if we look up this creek here that I really like, you can see that there's actually some really obvious ditches and creeks that feed back all the way back into this creek and feed this little river back up in here. And this is the type of area that is going to be dynamite when that water temperature starts to warm up into the 50 to 55 degree range on these Ohio lakes or pretty much anywhere in the country. And what will happen is these fish will actually use these little ditches and drains to winter in. And you'll be surprised, but these fish will actually live up here year round. They're resident fish. So they'll live all the way up here. They don't move all the way back out into this part of the creek and then wind their way all the way back in. They'll actually live back up in here all winter long, and they'll use these little ditches, which a ditch is basically an old creek channel or an old river that was there before the lake got flooded, and now it's underwater. And all these ditches are like little migration routes for these bass. And especially if there's any sort of flooded vegetation down there, lily pad stems, any kind of cover down there for those fish to get in, or even brush, those fish will actually use these ditches to stage, and they'll sit there feeding up on shad that get pushed around in the center of these ditches, and then they'll pull up onto these flats. And as you can see, right here, you have a nice flat area. You actually have a nice ditch that winds in right here. It comes in, and it feeds in right here, and it winds down, and it winds right back into this little flat area. These fish will sit out here maybe in January, February, and then they'll start moving back into these spawning bays, and they'll work their way back through here, and then they'll work their way all the way back into some of these flat areas to spawn. And so you'll catch them maybe in this center of this ditch on a lipless crankbait or a chatterbait in March or April when those water temperatures get between 50 and 55, 60 degrees. And then right when it hits 60 and those fish start to spawn, they'll pull up on the shallow cover, and you can catch them flipping, sight fishing, all kinds of stuff up these rivers. Real quick, want to thank Realistic Fishing for $5 super chat. Always great tips on reading maps here on Fish the Moment. I support realistic content like this. Appreciate it, man. Go check out Realistic Fishing's channel if you haven't already. Got some great content out there. He's always really active in the stream, so I always appreciate that, and appreciate the comments, man. I got some funny videos too, so go check him out. Other than that, with this kind of creek and stuff, this is actually the exact same type of stuff that the guys were fishing on Lake Conroe in the second Major League Fishing event. And so I watched some videos from the guys who are fishing on Lake Conroe, and just, Major League Fishing videos, Jacob Wheeler's practice videos, stuff like that. And if we actually go over to Lake Conroe, I kind of want to show you this real quick. In Texas, I want to show you what these guys were fishing in these ditches. So these guys, a lot of them were running, they were fishing, up here, or this is the lower end of the lake on Lake Conroe. It's the clear water, and these guys are running way up this river, and they're getting to the top of Lake Conroe where it gets really dirty, and there's a lot of fish that live up in Lake Conroe, and they were up here, and you can actually see images, if we take this back, where you can see some of the lake drawn down, and there's a lot of flooded bushes, there's a lot of really good cover back up in here, but you can also see, as you take the lake down, there's some incredible ditches that you can see as this lake was drawn down. You can see places where you have little underwater ponds, or places like back in here where you can see there's some deeper water in these little ponds here. And what these guys were doing is they were catching some fish. The water temperatures were pretty warm. They were getting warmer for sure throughout the tournament, and these fish were getting ready to spawn, but they weren't quite ready to move up. So if we take this footage back up, you can see these guys. You can actually see some boats and stuff up in here. There's some shallow grass. These guys were catching fish up in this grass, up in some of the buckbrush, flipping. These fish will spawn back in these bays. I actually saw Jacob Wheeler. He had his thumbnail for his video for his practice vlog was him back up in this little pocket right in here. But there's all kinds of really great looking stuff that these fish can get in. There's grass here. There's also, flooded buckbrush and stuff this time of year. These fish can get up in, and you can see there's some nice clean water back up in here. But you can also tell that, there's some really good ditches right in here, and these guys are fishing baits like a chatterbait or a spinnerbait in some of these little drains and ditches on the edges of these ditches, like right in here, and they were just hanging out. Those fish were hanging out, waiting for the water to warm up just enough for them to move back up here and to spawn. And a lot of guys were actually catching them up shallow on the bank. Jacob was catching some fish on like a buzzbait even, 55-degree water, but there was plenty of fish that were still staged out. And you could see a lot of guys fishing on the lower end as well, but some of these guys were really catching them in these ditches. Like this little trench right here, you can see has some really nice flooded timber, some stumps and stuff. It doesn't actually look like flooded timber, but there's some nice stumps, and it kind of ends right here in this ditch. This could be a great little area for those fish to pull up on, catch them on a little crankbait or a spinnerbait knocked around down there. And then again, as you move further up this lake, you can see all these little ditches and drains. I mean, it's just incredible what you can see on Google Earth. And you can kind of find, even right here, there's a little bit deeper hole right by this bank. This could be a really good little area for those fish to kind of stage. Man, I could just spend hours looking at this stuff, guys. There's so much good water. I mean, way up here, this actually looks so good up in here. I know that there's some guys who ran all the way up here and it was really dirty. Saw that in Jacob's video, that there's some guys who were kind of back up in this stuff. But tons of good water if these guys get on. And then the other guys were kind of fishing down the lake, doing the same exact deal, but they were kind of in some of these little marinas and stuff like that. You can see, again, there's some deeper stretches, and some of those fish were actually sitting out here off the bank, and they were sitting in these little ditches and turns and drains away from the bank. They weren't actually up on the bank. And again, there's a lot of fishing pressure, so some of the fish that would normally be sitting right up on the bank got pushed off and were sitting in these type of little drains and areas. And you can see this is all kind of dredged out for people who actually own boats or on the boat docks. And there's all kinds of ditches, and I mean, this lake is insane, especially with all this underwater footage or the historical images. You can find so much stuff, so I don't want to get too much into it. I mean, look at this. This is so good, guys. There's so much stuff. I could look at lakes for hours, guys. This is so much fun. But anyways, hope you guys enjoy me geeking out just as much as I love geeking out on all this water. But that's it, guys, for the main content for the video. I am going to try to run through and get to some comments. I don't have too much time today to do a lot of Q&A, but I do want to run through at least, maybe 15 comments, something like that, and kind of get some answers. So let me run through all those and see what everyone's saying. And people are definitely helping out with putting the fish the moment and then putting the question marks behind it. I mentioned that last time, so if you do have a question you want to ask me, put fish the moment, like at fish the moment, so that I can see the little red fish the moment box pop up on the stream or on the questions, and also put question marks behind your question, like 10 question marks, and I'll know it's an actual question you want me to answer. It's the best way for me to actually see your question since there's so many. So I'm going to scroll through. I might be silent for a second. It's hard to talk and read all these comments at the same time. HMoob 828 says, Johnny, your last upload was absolutely the best. It's absolutely the best how-to video for anything bassin. Really appreciate that, man. I'm assuming that's the Google Earth one, or maybe it was the patterns video. I'm not really sure. My top spinner is asking about lakes in California. I definitely want to get talking about lakes in California. The problem is I don't fish out in California, never have been out there to fish. I've been out there for work before, but never to fish. And so I don't want to give a lot of tips on California lakes without having a lot of experience out there. I can talk about lakes where guys have caught them during tournaments. I've watched like every Bassmaster and FLW show that has been out in the California Delta or out in Clear Lake, places like that. So I know kind of where the guys generally fish. And I can break it down from that perspective, but I don't have the experience out there to give you really well-informed opinions like I can in the lakes in the Midwest, in the South, or even like on the East Coast, places like that, or Texas. I fished in all those areas before. Let's see here. A lot of guys are saying they're spawning. A lot of guys says there's still ice. Apologize for the disparity there. So many guys. One guy's saying starting to get some ice in the coves north end of Grand Lake last weekend. That's B. Saunders. That's crazy. We talked about Grand at the beginning of the stream. That's pretty wild. Let's see here. I have trouble. So Scott Abbott says I'm having trouble keeping my crankbait bumping the bottom. Line, reel, advice. I'm throwing 7-foot medium rod with 6-5 to 1 gear ratio reel with 12-pound fluoro. So Scott, if you're still on or if you're listening afterwards, if you're having trouble keeping your crankbait on the bottom, two things. One, either you need to fish a deeper diving crankbait, which can be your problem. Two, you need to be reeling that bait faster so that it actually keeps bottom contact. Or three, you need to fish potentially a slower gear ratio reel. No, I don't know why I said that. Don't worry about the slower gear ratio reel. If you're having trouble keeping your bait on the bottom, you just need to throw a deeper diving crankbait. That's all there is to it. You can change your line size. Line size will impact how deep that crankbait dives, but 12-pound fluorocarbon is definitely light enough line to get that bait bump in the bottom. So what I would do is, if you're fishing in 5 feet of water and you're trying to fish a square bill and have it hit in 5 feet, you're going to have some trouble unless you're making a really long cast and you're cranking that thing pretty fast. So instead, I would just switch to like a 7 or 8 foot diving crankbait. And normally what I do is I don't actually fish crankbaits that match the depth of water I'm fishing. So if a crankbait says it dives 12 feet, I don't throw a 12-foot diving crankbait in 12 feet of water. Instead, I'm going to fish an 18-foot diving crankbait in 12 feet of water so that I'm really making sure I dig the bottom. And if anything, I might put that on a little bit heavier line, so 15 to 17-pound test, and fish an 18-foot diving crankbait. That will help so that I don't break off fish. The heavier line doesn't affect anything. It's not going to make the fish spooked or anything with a crankbait, and normally you can still get that bait down there 14 feet. Let's say you're throwing a striking 6XD that dives 18 feet. A lot of times I'll throw it on 25-pound monofilament or 20-pound monofilament in the summer if I'm fishing ledges that are in 10 feet of water, because it'll still grind the bottom a little bit, but that heavier line really makes it dive a lot shallower. So it might dive 12 feet rather than 18. So just go for the bigger crankbait and you're definitely going to be better off. Appreciate the super chat, Robert Warden. As always, thanks for the support, man. I always see you on the streams, commenting and doing super chats. So really appreciate that and see your comments as well. Thank you so much. Justin Newell says, favorite jig for this weekend on Grand. If you can find the clear water, I'd fish a 5/8 ounce or a 1/2 ounce football jig, green pumpkin with like a maybe a sweet beaver trailer, some sort of beaver style trailer, especially in that cold water. That'd be really good. And then if you're in that dirtier water and you're still trying to get those fish, especially well, it's not going to be sunny, so I wouldn't even worry about it if you're in the dirtier water. If I was fishing this weekend and there was dirty water and it was kind of rainy and potentially thunderstorms, just gross, I would be fishing a crankbait. I would fish that flat side crankbait pretty much all day. Maybe you have a really big spinner bait with that big blade and slow that reel that thing like super slow in some of that muddier water. But that's what I would do. If you're going to fish a jig, I would probably throw black and blue also this weekend with the cloud cover. Black and blue is always a really good color in the cloudy conditions and when you have dirty water. And if you had sunnier conditions and clearer water, I'd go fish a green pumpkin. But even if it's cloudy and I'm fishing in clear water, I still go for a black and blue jig. For whatever reason, those fish just really like a black and blue jig when it's cloudy in the clear water, and I'll fish the green pumpkin in the sunny conditions in that clear water. Let's see here. Someone suggested I should fish a state in each region this year. That's the Bassin Kid. That's a really good idea. I like that. Let's see. Fishmo says, is it worth the time to fish a good spot, a good-looking spot that is not on a part of like the fish are located during the time of year, like a dock in the back of a creek in the winter? Good question, Artie. Normally when I'm looking for spots, if there's like a really good dock that always has fish on it, a lot of times what you can do is actually go fish those docks, like specifically a dock if there's really sunny conditions, if the weather's warming up and you get some, good shade underneath that boat dock and it's really warm for a couple days in a row, those boat docks can be good. Really, a lot of times fish can get in weird spots when weather changes. So if the weather warms up really fast or if the water rises really quickly, you might find fish up shallow even in 45-degree water when you have rising water because the conditions change. So a lot of the textbook stuff I talk about is when you have pretty stable conditions, the weather's not warming up super fast, you're not having hot, heavy rains that raise the water, stuff like that. So it's kind of tough sometimes to use those general terms. A lot of times I like to do that as saying this is good in general, but I try to leave as many caveats as I can. Kind of like that quick patterns video I just made on my channel. The goal of that was to show that you can catch fish in weird ways in the wintertime, especially if you have some weird conditions. And so don't get too caught up on what is textbook. A lot of times you have to, again, fish the moment and figure out what those fish are doing in the moment and just kind of adapt to that. But yeah, you can definitely catch fish in weird locations. I check that kind of stuff all the time when I'm practicing or when I'm fishing. I'll spend 3 or 4 minutes running into the back of a pocket, skipping a boat dock up super shallow if it's sunny outside, just to see if there's fish up there. If there's not, no harm. I just run to the next spot, but it's always worth checking. Let's see here. More questions. Sorry, guys, I'm still talking, just trying to roll through. Mike Emberson, what bottom composition do you look for in the spawn on Grand? On Grand, the places that these fit, honestly, like during the spawn, if I pull up Grand Lake again, let me pull that up. Basically on Grand, I mean, these fish are just going to be spawning up in all of these pockets. It doesn't, as far as bottom composition goes, in general, I like to fish the smaller pebbles. So if we're going back like in a pocket, like back up in here, I'm looking for places where you have these smaller, looser rocks. I kind of like that when I'm looking for spawning bass, is these smaller little pebbles. And I like that just because it's easier for those fish to lay their eggs on. And then the other type of banks I'll actually look for are the flat rock banks. So if we look up like right here, you can see there's some areas on this lake where you get some kind of flatter rock. And a lot of times these fish can spawn out right out here on these main lake areas in that flat rock because they can spawn right on top of those rocks. The chunk rock is not as good for those bass to spawn on. If we go back down where we were looking at earlier, you can see that chunk rock bank I was looking at. Where'd that go? Oh, here we are. Sorry, I lost my bearing for a second. It was a nice chunk rock bank. These rocks are a lot bigger and thicker. These are not the banks I'm really going to be looking for because those bigger rocks are harder for those fish to spawn in. They lay their eggs, and the eggs it's hard for them to find a good flat circular area. If you think of a bed, those fish want to make a bed. And so those big flat rocks are great because they can lay their eggs right on top of that flat rock. Or then they like these, areas where they have the little pea gravel and stuff further back in these creeks. Like even right in here, you can see the rock is really chunky right here. It's really hard to see, actually. I apologize for that. But you can see there's some flatter rock back down this bank. And it's just smaller little pebbles, and there's not those big boulders. Those are the type of places those bass are going to be most likely to spawn. So, for example, pockets where I've caught them, or I've actually haven't fished out here in the spawn, pockets where I've seen guys catch them in the spawn, especially over the last FLW or the last Bassmaster tournament. I watched Jacob Wheeler fish a tournament out here, and he caught a really good spawning bass right off. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, is this point right here. He caught one off this point right here, and you can see it's a little bit flatter rock, and not flat rock. It's a little bit like the pebbles. It's a flatter bank with pebbles, and it's not the big chunk rock. Other banks that could be really good is like right in here. You can see it's little pebbles. This big chunk rock, not where the bass want to spawn. They don't want to spawn around this thick chunk rock. Fish around the pebbles. That's where you're going to find them. Thanks so much, Peyton Frost, for the $4.99 super chat. He says, "Hey man, I appreciate all that you do on your channel. I'm from Arkansas and live around Clarksville. You have taught me a lot. Woo pig." What's up, man? Woo pig suey. I'm probably going to get a lot of crap from you guys. I probably have missed all these comments. I can't get my head to turn the right direction. What am I doing? Sorry, guys. I'm like having issues over here. There we go. I don't know what I'm doing, guys. I apologize. I can't get this camera to work. I look like I'm having like a stroke or something. Anyways, woo pig. I get a lot of crap for having a flat bill cap. I just like them. I think they look cool. That's why I wear them. And I think they look better on my giant head than the round bill caps. And also love this hat because it has the giant Arkansas on the side, which is always I'm doing it on the wrong side. Giant Arkansas on the side over there. You guys, I apologize. I am all a mess. I've been talking for an hour and 8 minutes straight, and I'm just looking like a fool right now. But anyways, woo pig. So keep going down here. What are people saying? In general, when do you begin fishing for pre-spawn off the winter pattern? That's Brantley, Barbie. In general, I'm just looking for when the water starts to warm up pretty quick. So it goes from, if your water in your lake right now is 39 degrees and it starts warming up into the 45-degree range within a week, that goes like multiple warm days in a row, and that water starts to warm up, then I'm looking for pre-spawn bass. It doesn't always have to be an exact cutoff on the actual water temperature, but if you have some consistent warm days in a row, those fish are going to get ready to start to move up to spawn. And a lot of times you'll have those 5 or 6, 7 warm days in a row, then it'll have a cold front and it'll knock those fish kind of for a loop, but they'll still be in that pre-spawn mode, and so they'll still just kind of hang out in the pre-spawn areas for a while. But normally when you get those first 3 or 4 or 5 days in a row with some warm weather, that's when, and you don't have like snow for a week afterwards, that's when you know that you'll be able to find some pre-spawn bass. So I mean, a ton of comments, guys. I'm trying to get through everyone. Will you be at the Classic in Tennessee this year? That's Ian Wagner. Ian, yes, I will be at the Classic. I'll be there from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I don't know if there's actually an event on Thursday. I'm getting there Thursday, but then I'll be there Friday, Saturday, Sunday for the actual event. I'll be around the sports show. I'm probably going to try to set meetups each day. One day for a meetup I want to do at the show. One day I want to do a meetup afterwards, after the show, and maybe try to pick like a restaurant. I don't know what kind of restaurant I would want to have because I don't know how people are going to show up for the meetup. I might actually have like a little poll that says, are you going to join for this meetup? And I'll schedule something at one of the local restaurants, maybe like a pizza place. We can all grab pizza and hang out, talk about fishing, and just all meet up. So I'll try to figure that out as well. And so I haven't really thought that far ahead yet, but definitely something I want to do. Let me know in the comments too if you want to do a meetup and if you're going to be there. And then next comment, Tyler Graham says, I'm not fishing at the moment, but I'll be there. It's awesome. It's funny. Let's see here. Terry, you should break down my home lake, since the Bassmaster Classic will be on it next month. Do a nice pre-show. That's a great idea. I always do pre-show. I did a pre-show last year before the Hartwell Classic, so I'm probably going to do the same thing again this year, just to kind of give an idea of what the lake is going to be doing, what I think the prevailing patterns are going to be, things like that. And so I'll definitely be doing a pre-show on that. I'll probably just make it an actual video on my channel for you guys, just to kind of give an idea. I was like spot on with my prediction last year for the Classic. I picked Jason Christie as one of the guys who I thought was going to do really well or potentially win, and he finished like second, so really good pick there. On top of that, I picked the winning pattern, which was a boat dock pattern, fishing a worm under a boat dock, which is how Jordan Lee won the tournament, plus the shad spawn or the blueback herring bass in the morning. So got that spot on. Going for 2 for 2 this year. Let's see here. Oh, 0017 Bulldog says, the wife is starting to worry about me talking to my boat, man. I need this ice to melt. It's awesome. Ian Wagner says, I have a tournament in June at a lake that is very deep and drops off very fast. Deep parts are 100 to 140 feet. It's possible to catch them that deep. A lot of times you can't catch them in like 140 feet of water, but you can catch them suspended over the top of that deep water. So if you have any, like you might see shad, or you might have some trees or something that are sticking out off the bottom. And if it's 100 feet deep, those fish will suspend in 30, 40, or 50 feet of water over the top of that 100 feet. So if here's your bottom, This is the best way to do graphics, by the way. Use your hands. This is why I make graphics with Photoshop, say guys. But this is the bottom, 100 feet of water. Those fish will sit right here in the middle. Let's say the top of the screen is the surface. The fish will sit right here in the middle of the water column in 50 foot. Chill out right here, chasing shad or anything out in the center. Don't really know which part of the country you're in, but that's one way you can really catch them. You catch them on drop shots, catch them on underspin, stuff like that. Sometimes they won't get that deep though in the summer. They might be in 100 feet of water, but suspended in 30 feet, over 100 feet of water. They might be suspended in 20 feet of water, over 100 feet. So they don't always get super deep. So you can catch them in that general water depth, but they're just going to be suspended. Okay, I'm going to get one more question, guys, and I'm going to have to jump off. Clayton asks, when are you going to get an Ultrex for your boat? That is a great question. I just bought a new camera for my YouTube channel so I can improve the quality of that. So that was already a bunch of money right there, good investment. And so I'm going to hopefully see if, who knows, maybe someone will sponsor me and get me an Ultrex. Actually, what do you guys think about me working with companies? I know one thing that you guys always talk about is, how you like that I don't push products. And I'm trying not to make my YouTube channel a commercial, and that's definitely the case. There are some companies that I'm thinking about working with, but I just want your thoughts in the comments. Would you be okay with me promoting sponsored content? If so, how would you want me to do it? I have my idea of how I want to do it, and I'm going to work with companies that will let me kind of do more of like an organic way of showing you the product, not shoving it in your face like, hey, look at this lure by this company. It catches the most fish because it's this lure. Don't want to do that, but trying to think of ways that I can actually work with companies and get some support there. So let me know what you think in the comments at the end of this video, or just here in the chat. I kind of want to get your opinion, hear what you guys have to say. Don't want everyone calling me a sellout as soon as I put my first potential sponsor in a video. But Azen Hicks says, have you any success fishing in extreme weather, storms, overcast, wind, sleet, flood? What were your tactics and how did you look at the bass? I fished in all kinds of crazy conditions, like wild conditions where like the lake was flooded by like 12 feet and was rising like a foot a day. I fished in thunderstorms before and like got underneath boat docks, and there's so many different ways that those conditions affect bass. I want to make YouTube videos on all of those. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to fish as much as I want to, and I like to have some sort of footage to go along with what I'm talking about in my videos. So hopefully I'll be doing a lot more fishing over this next year, and I'll be able to have more footage to show you guys of those extreme conditions. So I might make a video about it. I'm making a video hopefully in the next couple of weeks about like how weather affects bass. It's one of the videos I'm going to be asking you guys to vote on my Patreon page. So again, check out my Patreon page over there. If you want a chance for me to look at your lakes, and you also want a chance for me to, or a chance to vote on the next videos I'll be making. So, other than that, there's a ton of people commenting. People saying, "Do work with companies; it'll be great for you." Always appreciate that. And then Clayton says, "I feel like you already do a great job of promoting products." That's awesome. I don't actually try to promote any products. I just talk about what I'm doing, and then. B. Saunders says, that's your life. What's good for you? Awesome. So, and then, yeah, a bunch of other people says, given how much knowledge you put in your fishing videos, companies should give you the items and say Panoptics. So, for sure, I definitely, would want to be honest. That's what RD Prevents Camping is saying. Just be honest with what you do, and, that's what I try to do, try to be transparent with you guys about where I fish, how I fish. I'm not holding anything back, not holding back the areas I fish. I show you everything about where I'm catching fish. Whenever I catch a big bag, I'm showing you the exact spot on Navionics or on Google Earth. So that's what I would do with my channel. That's what I would do with sponsorships as well. So other than that, really appreciate all of the great feedback you guys have given me on my channel, all the comments. If you like the channel, definitely subscribe if you haven't already. It's free to sign up to YouTube. It looks like about 75% of my viewers are not subscribed to my channel. And so as many of you guys who aren't subscribed, if you can go just subscribe, that would be amazing. You can also get notifications of my videos, also helps grow the channel. And then also just sharing the video with friends, that's the best way to promote the channel. Or if you can share out my video on forums, like Bass Boat Central, stuff like that. A lot of times they can ban you if you just go and put videos straight out. And I also don't like to just say, hey, go check out this video. It seems like really like I'm just There's a lot of people that do that. So as many of you guys who can actually share out my videos on those sort of platforms as well definitely helps grow the channel as well. So appreciate everything you guys are doing for me, and I love making all the videos. So thank you for all the great feedback, all the comments, all the suggestions and advice I'm getting from all kinds of people on how I should run my Patreon pages, how I should do the live streams, how I should make the videos. You guys are amazing. I know a lot of you guys are in business, you own your own businesses, you are high up in business, or you just have been around life for a long time. And so as a young guy trying to make my start in life and just everything, I always appreciate all of that. And so again, thanks for everything you guys do for me. So other than that, I'll be closing up this live stream, and I'll see you again next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time for another Fish the Moment live stream. Talk to you guys later.